Ah. Welcome, everyone, to the 28th episode of the Virginia Center for Creative Arts Fireplace series. My name is Isaac Rahmim, and I'm your host. Today, we focus on creative nonfiction writing, and specifically, 3 of the recent winners of the Goldfarb Fellowship. Let me start by telling you a little bit about the Goldfarb Fellowship. The Goldfarb Family Fellowship offers writers of creative nonfiction a fully funded 2-week VCCA residency in Mount St. Angelo. The fellowship was established in 2000 through the generosity of writer, literary agent, and former VCCA board member Ronald Goldfarb, and is sponsored by the Robert and Aida Goldfarb Art Law Literary Fund. I would like to point out that the application period for this fellowship is open right now, and the deadline for it is May 15th. So any of you nonfiction writers in the audience, there's still time to apply. I'm also told that Ron Goldfarb himself might be in attendance via Zoom or via this medium, and I want to welcome him and acknowledge his presence and contribution. So in the next 45 minutes, we will have brief 5 to 8 minute readings by the 3 writers, Jennifer Lunden, Aurvi Sharma, and myself, followed by discussions and questions and answers to the extent that time allows. For questions and comments, you'll find the chat box on the right side of your screen, I think, and please feel free to type those in, and we will address them. I will read them out loud, and we'll discuss them. So without taking much more time, let me start by introducing our first Goldfarb Fellow. Jennifer Lunden's debut book, American Breakdown: Notes from an Industrialized Body, is forthcoming from Harper Wave, slated for release in May of 2023. And in fact, she has been working this month on the penultimate round of edits of the book while in residence at the VCCA. And in fact, she is coming to us from the library of VCCA. The chapter from the book was a Maine Literary Award finalist, and her essay, Fugitive Justice, published in Long Reads, won the Maine Literary Award for Short Works Nonfiction in 2021. Lunden's nonfiction has been published in Creative Nonfiction, Orion, River Teeth, Diagram, and other journals. Her work has appeared in several anthologies, including True Stories, Well Told from the First 20 Years of Creative Nonfiction magazine, and she is the winner of a Pushcart Prize. Lunden.
Thank you, Isaac. Yeah, so I am really excited to be here. I was grateful to be asked. I think it's so cool that I can do this while I'm here at VCCA, soaking up the beauty and the peace and the joy of this place. And I actually, as Isaac said, I actually submitted my penultimate draft to my editor while I was here about a week ago. And so I decided that I wanted to use this time to just give a little sneak preview of this book that I've been working on for a long, long time, including the times that I've been here at VCCA. And the title we already heard is American Breakdown: Notes from an Industrialized Body. And it blends memoir, history, science, and social criticism to explore the health hazards of unfettered industrial capitalism. And you'll get more about like sort of what the seeds of the book are from what I read. But I just need to say that Alice James was the sister of Henry James, the writer, and William James, the psychologist. And she was also brilliant, but she was very sick, and a woman in a patriarchal culture. So her voice didn't get out as much. And so my book sort of weaves back and forth between Alice's world in the 19th century and my own world now. So I am going to read you segments from 2 or 3 from 2 different chapters. And the first is the very first 2 segments of chapter 1. And and our chime will just let us know on every quarter of the hour that that's what time it is. This chapter is called Bankruptcy. I imagine her in the summer of 1862, swimming with friends off the coast of Newport, all of them laughing and teasing, splashing around, showing off, the things boys and girls did in the water in the mid-19th century and still do. They've swum out beyond the surf, and the water is calm and warm, and for a moment, perhaps, Alice James feels free. She is 13, on the cusp of young womanhood and all its accompanying constraints. The water sparkles in the sunshine, rippling around her body. Does she swim the breaststroke to protect her hair? Does she float on her back and look up at the clear blue sky? Or does she dive down deep, eyes open, reveling in a world so different from the one above the surface? Looking back almost 30 years later, Alice wrote of that vanished girl, lamenting her blank, youthful mind, ignorant of catastrophe. I was 26 years old when I first laid eyes on the gold spine of Jean Strauss's Alice James, a biography, and pulled it down from the shelf. I'd heard about Alice. We had something in common. We'd both been felled by a mysterious fatigue. The book is fragile now. Its cover holds on to the spine by just an inch, and some of the pages are falling out, and most of them bear some kind of markings. Inside, I see the price, $2.50, still penciled inside the front cover. Someone else owned the book before me. When I bought it, I took a purple pen to her name, crossed it out, and wrote my own, and the year, 1994. I had been sick for 5 years. I didn't know then that the book was treasure in my hands. It would become my company, my work, my healing. At the time, I was the live-in caretaker of a 1789 historic house museum in Maine and its substantial perennial garden, laid out in measured decorum inside a white picket fence. When I think of it now, I see it bursting in the violent bloom of high summer, stands of white liatris spiking the clear blue sky, gold rudbeckia 6 feet tall and toppling, aphids on the helianthus, mold on the phlox, weeds overwhelming all the back beds. The garden was too much for me. From the bedroom window on the second floor, I could see the explosion of color, a carnival of red, yellow, purple, and pink. But I rarely looked down upon the garden from the bedroom window, because what I saw more than anything, even from that vantage, was my failure to keep up. For me, the garden was something to be contended with. When I should have been weeding it, taming it, saving it from itself, instead I lay in bed in the cool of the oscillating fan, reading about my dead bed comrade, Alice James. In Alice, I met my Victorian counterpart, my comrade, and somehow reading about her, bright, witty, proud, and stuck, I began coming unstuck. Why was Alice sick? Why was I? From my bed, and with the aid of interlibrary loan and a helpful librarian, I set out on a journey to find some answers. I spent years researching American history, 19th century and contemporary toxicology, biology, medical history, economics, environmental history, sociology, chaos theory, and more. And by the time I finished, things were a whole lot clearer. And then the other segment I'm going to read is also from part 1, but this is chapter 4, and it's called Territories. And I'll just read it. It's an awfully phallic image, this scene plucked from our national psyche, the golden spike proudly hammered into a pre-drilled hole in the last railroad tie under the last rail that would finally join America's urban industrial east to its fertile and untamed west. A crowd of about 600 people, mostly men, had gathered at Promontory Summit, Utah, to witness the official act that would signal the people's triumph over the vast and treacherous American landscape. It was 1869, the year that George Beard introduced the term neurasthenia, which was what Alice's illness was called, and America's love affair with industrial capitalism was thrusting full steam ahead. Americans believed it was their manifest destiny to colonize the country, civilizing the rugged land, imbuing the entire nation with a distinctly American triumvirate of ideals, democracy, independence, and a mentality of unflagging forward progress. The Transcontinental Railroad would unite the nation's economy, transporting machines, tools, building materials, coal, and other goods from sea to shining sea. Train after train steamed through this wild nation as settlers fanned out across the country, hacking their way through the brush, felling trees, planting fields, warring against the indigenous people who already lived here. Women's bodies also fell under the rubric of wild and inexplicable territories men sought to colonize. Take, for instance, Dr. J. Marion Sims, inventor of the duck-billed speculum, who performed his gynecological experiments, including surgery without anesthesia, on enslaved women, many of whom he bought and kept in the back of his private hospital. Of the new worlds opened up by his creation, Sims wrote that he could see everything as no man had ever seen before. I felt like an explorer in medicine who first views a new and important territory. Another gynecologist, Dr. Robert Batty, saw himself as a Daniel Boone of the female body, carving out for myself a new path through consecrated ground upon which the foot of man has not dared willingly to tread. Women and their bodies were generally correlated with nature and all of its mysterious power, and men sought to master women's bodies as they were striving to master America's virgin landscape. And if there's time, I would like to read just a half a page more, which is because I'd like to read it because I actually remember everywhere I wrote things. And this last little piece I wrote here at VCCA in the little copse of trees where the fish pond is. And it was such a peaceful place to sit and write. And so this is from part 3, chapter. The chapter is called Guilt, G-I-L-T. When Donald Trump moved into the White House, he put in a request with the Guggenheim to borrow Van Gogh's Landscape with Snow for his private living quarters, but curator Nancy Spector told him the painting was unavailable. She offered him an 18-karat golden toilet instead. The artist, Maurizio Catalan, had proposed the installation, a functioning toilet in a private stall, just after the billionaire, business magnate, and reality TV star announced his bid for presidency in mid-2015. Describing the piece as 1% art for the 99%, Catalan invoked the catalyzing 2011 Occupy Wall Street catchphrase that critiqued the inequitable distribution of wealth and power in the US. He called his piece America. At the time, few people imagined that the man with a well-documented penchant for gilded fixtures would soon be a fixture in the White House. Alice James lived in America's first Gilded Age, and now we're living in the second.
Thank you, Lunden, for that very, very interesting and thought-provoking reading, which I hope we can discuss at length. But I wanted to, again, have us continue our readings with our next Goldfarb fellow, and then later on we can sort of regroup and discuss. So let me introduce Aurvi Sharma. Aurvi Sharma grew up in the Indian hinterlands, moving from river to river with her family. Aurvi has been awarded the Gulf Coast Nonfiction Prize, the Prairie Schooner Essay Prize, the AWP Kurt Brown Prize, the Wasafiri New Writing Prize, a Glenna Luche Prairie Schooner Award, and 3 Pushcart nominations. She's working on a memoir about her forgotten foremothers, the Yamuna River, and the disobedient women who thrived by the river for millennia. Aurvi's writing appears in Bon Appetit, Guernica, Kenyan Review Online, Pleiades, Pour Genre, Essay Daily, and Everyday Genius. Aurvi, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much for having me, Isaac, London, Kim. It's such a delightful honor to be reading with both of you, and I look forward to our discussion after the readings. The piece I'm going to read today, it's called Seeing Double. Um, I'll just dive right into it. At the age of 89, my grandfather forgot how to speak. He frowned and squeezed his eyes shut, trying to remember what he wanted to say. He gestured towards a notebook and pen, then drew a zigzag line on the page. He ground his teeth in rage, threw the pen on the floor, and walked away. My grandfather had been famous in our state for his electric lectures. He taught Persian, Sanskrit, and English. Students abandoned their teachers and crammed into Dada's classes. He recited shairi, wrote poetry. The country was in ferment against British rule. Dada led protest marches, his voice cracking like thunder. Behind his glasses, his right eyeball veered towards his nose and stayed there, losing sight like a fading stage light. Dada's lazy eye would manifest itself in five of his grandchildren, a trait always appearing in the right eye, passing down like an heirloom in a family too poor to save any gold. As if to shake away this congenital weakness, every Sunday morning, Dada rubbed mustard oil all over his body and dueled with the local pehelwans in the village akhada. When incensed, which was often, he did not hesitate from pulling punches outside the ring. Once he slapped my 14-year-old father so hard, he lost hearing for a week. In addition to hitting his children, Dada also beat his wife. He shoved her, slapped her, struck her, smacked her for 2 decades until one day my father, 17 years old and leaving for university, held Dada's hand back and said, "No more. You will do this no more." When my grandmother's father, a prosperous doctor, had heard about Dada's poetry and inspired teaching, he had wondered why Dada was still unmarried at 33. Bhenga hai, people had murmured. Dada's amblyopia was an impediment to marriage. No one wanted their grandchildren to turn out cross eyed, and the family were dirt poor to boot. The doctor, however, was impressed by Dada's double master's degrees. At the wedding, my great grandfather dabbed turmeric on his daughter's palms as she sat sobbing next to Dada, her face covered with a red veil. But language remained Dada's muse, his intoxicant. At home, when he beat my grandmother, his mouth was succulent with abuses. Whore, bitch, cunt. Years of wrestling had turned his hands hard like wooden boards. As he hit her, she fell and shielded herself with her arms. The red and green bangles she wore splintered while Dada paid no heed to his father, who grabbed him by the back of his kurta, calling out, "Kasai, are Kasai, ruk ja. Butcher, oh butcher, stop." My mother was dismayed when, at 9 months old, my right eye started drifting too, and I followed her clapping hands with only my left. She cursed the unfairness of her perfect first child, who she had wanted to name Ananya, one unlike any other, inheriting this duality in vision. Together, my parents took a rickshaw to the only optician in town and ordered my first pair of glasses. My mother tied the temples with a shoelace at the back of my head, lest I threw the glasses away, but I never did, my parents tell me. I like to believe that I hung on to my glasses because it was my first clear view of the world. The emerald of the Himalayan foothills, the pink walls of our government home. When tired, I often saw everything in pairs. This is because amblyopia produces double vision, my mother told me. As I grew older, I bore my squint like a superpower, a gift from my extraordinary grandfather. taking on headaches and failing eyesight for an exclusive binary look at the world. In the 5th grade, my classmate Akriti invited me to her 10th birthday party. My mother braided my hair that September evening, and my father spritzed me with his Charlie perfume. I wore a purple frock with padded shoulders. The party was in a green hall where moths skittered against neon lights. I was looking for Akriti between rows of chairs set up like in a theater when I heard the murmurs. Dekh, Bhengi. A group of children were whispering, clutching each other, staring at me. I turned behind to see the object of their cruel fascination. Empty chairs? And turned hot under the padded shoulders. In a blink, my world split into two. I ran from the party, tears obscuring my double vision. Until this moment, I had not known that I was a cross-eyed Bhengi. I have squint, I had explained to people cheerfully all my life, ignorant of what the English euphemism meant. I had been familiar with my condition only through how I saw the world, unaware of how the world saw me. My grandfather, too, had ignored this word. He narrated Urdu poetry full of innuendo, traced word roots between Sanskrit, Persian, and Latin. He could hold forth on the philosophy of mathematics, talk about quarks and invoke them in a Sanskrit shlok, meditate upon flawed Shakespearean heroes. Always pursuing rationality, he told me about XX and XY, the phallic symbolism of the lingam, the earliest rubber condoms, but he never said a word about our eyes. What is the right way of seeing? We filter perceptions through the cornea, iris, pupil, lens. The brain flips each image, and here it is, an upside down world in constant translation. What does the world really look like? It's a little like madness, this vision business. The rules of the masses apply. Recalling memories is another way of seeing. Thinking about my grandfather, my right eye aches today, a trick of the brain. But human eyes existed prior to the mind, evolving in watery habitats. By detecting light with proto-eyes, organisms establish circadian rhythms and birds' seasons, memory, time. Perhaps tears flow in a cognizance of those aqueous beginnings. In his last year, when my grandfather forgot how to speak, he insisted on sleeping with the lamps on. He moaned with rage and paced for hours around the house until he fell. He pushed his nurse away with his wasting wrestler's body and screamed if any of us tried to go near him. But when my father put his arms around Dada's shoulders, Dada allowed himself to be lifted up and led to the bed. He sat on the edge and drank a glass of water my father raised to his lips. Then he held his son's hand and wept. Thank you.
Thank you, Aurvi. That was beautiful. Very, very lovely writing.
Thank you.
I set originally this order of reading, and now I kind of hate it because I have to come after the two of you.
Oh.
So the bar is pretty high, but I guess it is my turn. I will read for a few minutes, and then we can sort of open up the conversation. I'm going to read a segment from a memoir that I've been working on for an unconscionable number of years. What you need to know is the setting of this bit is in San Diego, and in fact, it was in 1985. The night late in 1985 that my wife and me were thrown out of her parents' San Diego house, my father-in-law crouched low on the front steps, his head slumped, his laborer's hand covering his creased, sun-blotched forehead. "I feel very sad," he said with a crack in his warm, Spanish-accented voice. It was cold out, and I stood there over him, wrapping an overshirt around myself and rubbing my biceps as we waited for my wife to gather her suitcase. We didn't say much else. My father-in-law and I had had other conversations on the same steps. "Are you from the jungle?" he had once asked, puzzled when he found that I did not believe in God. Another time, the night we told him that we planned to marry, he had objected. "There are ways," he said. "We are a good family. You must ask for my daughter's hand." And then, "Don't study so much. You will go crazy," he had warned with an index finger pressed to the temple when I announced that I would be going for yet another graduate degree at a far-off university. I confused him, but naturally caring and happy, he would still smile, his eyes brightening, pinching at the corners. But now, tears. My older brother-in-law, a large man and a drug dealer, once nearly gunned down by rivals, asked us to leave politely but firmly, and with unexpected eloquence. There was a meeting while Marisol and me had gone out to a movie and dinner. They judged me to be a non-contributor, irresponsible, a bum, and there was no point for me staying in their home, was there? Where was I when the family moved my wife, from San Francisco back into her parents' house after she finished law school, when they carried her boxes and books down steps and up steps here and there, when they helped her settle one more time into her childhood bedroom? My mother-in-law, who refused now to speak except in Spanish, which I could not understand, signaled her disapproval by refusing to look at me, staring into the corner of their living room where a small plastic statue of Mary holding Jesus stood. That night, long past midnight, driving in shame to my uncle's house near Los Angeles, even with my wife who had picked me over them sleeping in the passenger seat, I felt like a vagabond, alone and homeless. This is what you read about, I remember thinking. This confrontation and eviction. This is what happens to poor people, to those with tattoos and bad teeth, this life in disarray, this not belonging, betrayed by the world, you and your things in an old, rust-stained, banged-up car in a nameless highway. In reality, I was homeless, having just contorted all my meaningful belongings into 7 battered cardboard boxes in anticipation of moving to Manhattan's Morningside Heights in order to start my doctoral studies at Columbia. This was the end of a brief goodbye tour of California, the state that had been my home for 7 years after coming from Iran to study. I had visited relatives in Los Angeles and friends in Santa Barbara and old haunts in San Diego. I had had a one-nighter with an older woman who had tapped my shoulder in a dance club. I then visited my wife. My in-laws were a working-class Mexican-American family with a routine of 12 hours a day manual labor of the American dream in midstream, realized in increments and dosed with setbacks large and small. A second TV and added bedroom more than canceled by uninsured illnesses, leisure and blessed meals around the backyard grill with aunts and uncles and brothers, balanced by daughter moving far away to satisfy her own individual ambition. Framed posters of the blonde Christ and statues of Virgin Mother overlooking the birth of an out-of-wedlock grandchild. And also this, a curveball of a son-in-law, an unbelieving, unsmiling, bearded Iranian Jew whose natural habitat was the lone room and the blank wall, one from a different world altogether, farther away than the moon. They lived in a ranch house surrounded by chain link fence. Their small city north of San Diego was dominated by the army base where he worked as a warehouse man. I imagine him carrying provisions from one side of the warehouse to the other, handing out blankets and bullets at the counter, sacks of beans and piles of khakis and heads of cooked ham. When my relatives questioned me about my father-in-law's job, I only answered that he worked for the army. A military man, said an elder of the family when she heard this, straightening her back. To them, a military man leads regiments, organizes coups d'etats, topples governments. I did not clarify. So many years later, my father-in-law haunts me. He's all around me. Here goes the 60-year-old gardener at my golf course pushing a wheelbarrow filled with sod, his mustache rectangular and gray, his skin grooved and the color of coffee, his eyes squinted under the yellow harshness of the Houston sun. There sits the balding man wearing a checkered, sweat-stained shirt, also late of age, crouching on the dusty curb by the decommissioned train tracks, from which only a trace of a hill remains, waiting to be picked for a day of labor by SUVs and trucks that roll by at a walking pace, and from whose insides eyes trace the bulges of his muscles. Also Ramon, our cleaning man once a week, who brings his wife and daughter to scrub my floor and launder my sheet and brush my toilet bowl. Ramon, who has 3 jobs: house cleaning, Burger King, and another job I do not remember, another job not important to me. Ramon with the bouts of bad luck. My car broke down, he says one week, with the gentle, edgeless accent of the Chicano, the warm voice that reminds me so much of my father-in-law. My mother died, Senor Isaac, he says another time. I got kidney stone a 3rd time. Oy, it hurts bad, Senor Isaac. Ramon, who I finally let go, kidney stone and dead mother and old broken car and all, because I need my toilet bowl white and sanitized every week. So I'm going to stop here and sort of open it up.
I just want to say that right behind me in this part of the library is another part of the library where several, I don't know how many, fellows are watching, and I've heard them applaud after each of you read. So there's a live audience.
Great. That's great. And it reminds me of when before we opened the Fireplace series with the start of COVID, where actually that's where we did the readings, right in front of the fireplace.
Yeah.
And so it's lovely. It's lovely. So I guess I thought maybe I can open with just quickly asking each one of you, Aurvi and Lunden, to tell us a little bit about your book and where it is and so forth. So Lunden, why don't you go first?
Well, I already talked about my book, and I'm curious more to hear from Aurvi, because I wasn't sure. Were you reading from the book that you're working on, Aurvi?
I mean, there are parts of this essay in the book because it's a family history. It sort of weaves the story of this river called Yamuna in India, and she's supposed to be a goddess. So it's a story of all the forgotten of the forgotten women who have sort of thrived by the river's banks through the ages, sort of woven through with the story of my family's women, my foremothers, as it were, who never really got any glory or stories of their own. So it's a lot of family history. I've been doing interviews. I have traveled down the Yamuna from the origin to where she meets the Ganga. Yes, so I've been working on it for a while, as one does.
Yes.
So it's a blend of memoir, research, history, reportage, and this little bit that I read is woven into the story. It's a larger story in there.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I noticed when I was both reading your works earlier and listening now, you both write with great precision. Both when and both of you in your writing interweave very personal stuff with you sort of telescoping, stepping back and scientifically looking at this. Where does and I have you make theories, like I'm sort of trying to figure out where does this precision come from? Backgrounds in science, your other life. How does that happen?
Aurvi, do you want to answer first, or do you want?
I would love for you to go first. I'm completely stumped by that question.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I've been writing the book for 20 years. So, and the especially the first 2 segments that I read, I mean, the first segment I read is actually new. My editor suggested it, and I was like delighted with what came. But then the next little segment is like one of the first things I wrote, and as I was reading, I was like, oh, I'm really familiar with this one. And even when I was like preparing, I was like, oh yeah, like there was one word I was thinking about changing. And so there's been plenty of time to get precise. And then your other question was like, are you scientists and something, you know? And for me, it's like science. So there's, I didn't read any of the science part of my book, but I did really poorly at science, but it felt really important to me to understand human biology and toxicology and the other things in order to tell the story that I wanted to tell. And so I had to learn. I learned a lot. I have scientific friends that I would put things past to make sure that I'm not messing it up. And same with history. I mean, I love history, but like I had to learn everything, which is why it's taken me so long. And I don't know what else I can say about precision, but other than that, I really like to read very clean writing that also has a sense of space. And so I aspire to do that as well. But Aurvi, does that give you any time to answer?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. I've never been asked that before, and I'm bilingual. My mother tongue is Hindi. I write in English, and often times I feel like I know neither of the two languages. Like, most of my like regular life, I'm like grasping at straws, like trying to remember that. I'm just like that thing, that thing. So I think when I'm writing, that's my sort of space to really pin it down, to
Yeah.
really work with the language, to really try to express what I want to say. And again, it's also the kind of writing I enjoy reading, and influences and such. But I think for me, uh, I also grew up in a country with a colonial hangover, of English being superior and such. And, I'm not a native English speaker. So sometimes I feel like I'm showing off when I'm writing in English, because I'm like, take that. I can write that.
It's so funny that you say that, because I have a friend who's a science writer, and so she is naturally good at writing science, and she writes science. I think the science writing that she does, she makes it even more colloquial than I do. My effort is to write science in a way that is very clear and understandable, but I do want to show, I need to prove to people. She doesn't have anything to prove. I do. I have to prove to people that I know what I'm talking about, even though I'm not a scientist.
Yeah. No, that's a thing with nonfiction, because people often are there. Like, I have an essay that I've written about geology, which merges geology with memoir. And they're like, "Are you a geologist?" And I'm like, "No, I just like reading, I suppose." I think I'm a better reader than a writer, and of course, when you read widely, that would inform your work, as it should. That's the joy of nonfiction, to be able to take these diverse, incredible form nuggets of knowledge that exist in the world and turn them into a work of art.
Yeah, to me,
I also use a lot of science because I'm a failed science person. I come from a family of like engineers and professors, and my family was very disappointed when I decided to become a writer. So I have to prove to them that I still have my science brain, I think. So I'm always bringing in science into my writing.
yes. See, it's very legitimizing, isn't it?
It is.
So essentially, what you're saying is, writers. I'm generalizing. We write our insecurities. If you're not a scientist, you want to prove it. If you didn't become a doctor to make mom and dad proud, is that what you're saying?
I can describe it.
Harvey, I wanna turn my question on its head, which is, both you and me, we are bilingual, and in this section I didn't have it, but I also write my things set in the Middle East and so forth, and I have Persian words, Arabic words, and so forth that I want to use. one of the things you find out is you cannot do a precise translation at all. And in fact, I go back to the Israeli writer Amos Oz, who once said, to do a good job of translation, you have to betray the writer. And in a way, when you are doing the bilingual kind of writing, you have to betray yourself. And I noticed in your reading, you use the word pahlawan, which kind of means strong man, wrestler. I can put 200 words in English to it, and I will still not get the sense that I know you do. At what point do you just sort of throw your hands out and say, I give up? I know I can't do this precisely. Where do you do this?
I mean, for me, I feel like it's an exercise in futility. Writing dialogue is impossible. Like there's just, you cannot translate it. It's just impossible to capture that essence, like that, the juice that is inherent in a language. It's like translating poetry. It's you might as well just not do it. I don't know. I really struggle against it. It's I mean, tell me if you if you find, tell me how to do it, because
That's why I ask you. I'm trying to get ideas because I get stuck in this all the time. It's
I really like, one thing I really enjoy doing is breaking down the words in other languages and getting to their roots, like the etymology of it. That helps me sort of braid together different languages in a way to really peel the onion, as it were. But it's hard.
It's very hard.
I don't have a good answer. It's impossible.
But also, by the way, I just want to say, Lunden and Aurvi, both of you, when you bring scientific things, let's say whatever thing you're, in a way, that's the job of translation.
Yeah, I was thinking that as you were talking.
Yeah. So
except that, like, well, yeah. I mean, I was thinking as you were talking about translating other languages that you're trying to capture the poetry and the multitude of meanings into English. And with science, it's like you're trying to capture the multitude of complexities into English in a way that's readable, but still correct.
Yeah. And without footnotes, unless you do it, a creative way or something, unless you're being avant-garde or whatever. So,
right.
Yeah.
I want to bring our audience in there. By the way, there are really some good, fun comments, including when Aurvi was talking about, I do mostly reading, and we had Michelle Levy saying those are called rabbit holes. Totally true. I it's just like, oh no, I rather read today instead of write.
Any day. Yeah.
Yeah. But we have a question from Renata Van. Apologies if I mispronounced the name. And sort of a question: how do you shape a book? Writing a thread at a time or thematically? When you have, especially in your writings, both of you have 2 or 3 threads going together. Do you like do one thread? How do you shape it as you're going on? Lunden, do you want to go first?
I love that question. I'm glad you saw it there. And because I knew I don't have a quick answer. And also, like, I've been writing the book for years and learning how to write it as I go. And so I can't remember how I started, but eventually got to the point where I'd be like, well, I want to write this story of Alice James. And I would just write as much as fit with what I was thinking about at that time. And I want to write this memoir about me, and I would write it. And then I would be thinking, I had all this research with notes, and I knew kind of what I wanted to put in. I'm not going to give an orderly answer, which actually conveys, like, I don't feel like there is a lot of order in creating a book that's so interwoven like mine. And it sounds like Aurvi's is as well. But I guess that's kind of, that's why it's so hard, but also why it's so gratifying. Because to me, the reason I write is to create order out of chaos. The world is just feels chaotic and I don't know what's going on. And so I researched a lot and I sort of came up with a story fit with the story that I wanted to tell. And it grew and expanded over time. And then I would fit that in. And then there were revisions of the whole thing. My agent suggested a major revision, and then I did another one for my editor, and now it's like I feel really good about where it's at right now. But I'm not sure. I've got one more big edit. Well, who knows what kind of edit it'll be? I hope it'll be a small edit. But my acquiring editor is looking at it for the first full time, and we'll see what happens. I don't know if that even answers the question, but that's the best I can do. But what about you, Aurvi?
No, I really agree with you about what you said about, the world is chaos and you're just trying to bring some order into it. Like for me, when writing is all about making meaning, like life is chaotic, and just to be able to create something out of it. Like I really bristle sometimes when people talk about nonfiction as sort of catharsis, and I'm always just like, this is not like autobiography. It's like there is a big difference between just writing a journal and writing nonfiction, which is where you have a certain idea in mind and you're writing towards it. You're very deliberately creating a work of art. So in that sense, just doing something with the chaos to say something larger in a way. And usually, I when it actually comes to the process of how to shape it, I like to think of it as like a brewing a witch's pot, where I just, it's like you think of something and you start pulling at that thread, and then I usually have like a completely messy document. I start researching, and whatever comes up, I just keep pasting stuff and making notes and writing it. It's madness. It's very infuriating to me. I stay with it for months, and then I start editing. So it's sort of like taking a lump of clay and then sort of chiseling your way through it. I move things around. Sometimes I take these like 100-page printouts and then I cut things up and move them around as well. Like there's no right way of doing it. Sometimes something emerges out of the chaos.
I did that too here at VCCA once, and it was just so wonderful to have like a really big floor, and I literally cut everything up and moved it around for one of my chapters. And the other thing I thought of too, as you were talking, Aurvi, and then maybe we can ask Isaac the same question, but is that for me, it's like I feel like my subject is really heavy, and the reason I intermingle memoir is to keep people reading. So I feel like you can bring more visual imagery, more imagery of all kinds, sensory imagery into memoir or biography even, and then you can into science, I think. And so if I'm going to be writing about something hard, then I'm going to want to give people a break with something beautiful. But what about you, Isaac? How would you answer that question?
Yeah, I think I'm with both of you. I think Renata got her answer, which is it's chaos. You just you keep on throwing things at it, like an abstract painter and hoping it looks good. But yeah, I mean they're tricks of the trade. There are exactly this back and forth, the telescoping. When you're talking about some topic, let's say you look at the scientific angle and then you get closer and you're like, well, this is my life as how it relates to it, or something. And you go back and forth. Giving the reader a break is really good. Once I went to an operetta that somebody had written, and it was about a really, really tough, painful topic. And by the end of it, I think we wanted to cut our own throats. It was sort of like, please give us a break. Could somebody sing something a little happy or light? You just got to give people a break sometimes. And for me, the other thing about memoir is it helps
the reader connect with a person that helps the reader connect with their own story.
Yes, and I've heard this. That is, if you're doing your job as a writer well, they're not ending up thinking about you. They're ending up thinking about their own lives.
Yes.
You have really gotten to them. So,
I do want to just quickly add that flip side for that for me is that, when I'm writing as a woman, writing nonfiction, I constantly want to bring in history and other cultural contexts just to politicize. It's a political artifact. I'm putting my voice out there, and women's voices don't exist in history. So that's the other side of it for me, to say what I'm saying has as much legitimacy as those other hundreds of books that have been written over millennia, which haven't covered somebody like me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah, so well said.
Yeah, we have Joyce Young, a fellow who apparently used the floor technique at VCCA, like many of us, spreading papers on the floor of the studio. So
yeah, the serial killer wall/floor technique.
Yep.
Wall, floor, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Great. You're not going to believe this, but we have managed to overshoot our time by a good 5-6 minutes. I guess I want to sort of give either one of you, Aurvi and Lunden, just the chance, a final thought before I close this down.
Just wanted to say thank you, and this was wonderful.
Yes, it has been wonderful. It's great to hear about both of your work, and I always love talking creative nonfiction. And I wanted to make sure to thank Ron Goldfarb for creating this fellowship for all of us, and also to thank Kim for she's behind the scenes doing all the wizardry, and Sheila Pleasance for organizing this too. So it's been a pleasure.
Great. And again, I want to add to this. I want to thank VCCA for giving us this chance. I want to give a big thank to Kim Doty, is in the background. You're not seeing her, but she's sort of keeping us in line and in order and running this whole thing, which is a major thing. I loved spending this time, Lunden and Aurvi, with you. Thank you so much for doing this. I want to remind everyone that 15th of May is the deadline for applying for the Goldfarb Family Fellowship. So nonfiction writers among you, please do that. And at the end, I want to thank all of you, the audience, for joining us. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.